I'm not sure if I'm the only mom that has this goal, but this summer I am determined to not be the sole entertainment for my kids. And one way that I'm accomplishing this is by using kid podcasts, like this week's podcast, Bear King and Bobo Chico Stories for Kids. I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I'm a mom who has used podcasts to fight the boredom and loneliness of motherhood, and now I want to help you find a podcast that can do the same thing for you. It can be overwhelming to try and find a podcast you'll enjoy in the thousands of shows that are out there. That's where I come in. My episodes are short, and they answer all of the questions you'll have about the podcast, so you'll know if it's a good fit for you or not. I'm here to help you find a podcast you'll love without wasting your time. Now, let's talk podcasts. Bob Hastings, the narrator and writer of the show, describes it like this. It's an ad-free children's podcast series with episodes about kindness, friendship, and overcoming uncertainty. Bear King is a friendly, knowledgeable talking bear who likes spending time and sharing gifts with his family and young friends. Bobo Chico is a talking river otter who is Bear King's lovable, highly enthusiastic best friend. While on their adventures, Bear King and Bobo Chico meet many interesting people who help them overcome challenges and learn important, positive life lessons. Each story invites the listener to experience the familiar and also use their imagination. The length of each episode is about 10 minutes. Before we learn more about the vibe of Bear King and Bobo Chico, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my podcast consultations. I've been able to talk to some amazing podcasters about their shows while doing interviews for the Friendly Podcast Guide. And along the way, I've learned so many tips and tricks on how to start a podcast from the hosts I've interviewed and personal experience. I've talked to them about what made their launch successful and what made it more difficult. And I for sure know what I would do differently if I could go back and launch my show again. And now I want to share my knowledge with you. I'm offering podcast consults, and I have a couple of spots open in the next month. If you need help nailing down your podcast idea, figuring out your niche, or any other podcast questions, I would love to work with you to make your show's launch the best it can be. If you're interested in working with me, fill out the intake form in the show notes. I can't wait to make a podcast plan that is tailored to you and your podcast and will make your launch as smooth and successful as possible. Now we get to hear from Bob as he talks about the kiddos that inspired his storytelling and his podcast. Bob, welcome to the Friendly Podcast Guide. I cannot wait to talk about your kid podcast. But before we dive in, can you introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners?
Sure. I'm Bob Hastings. 2 years ago, I retired as an architect, and with that opportunity, really took on one of my projects of creating the Bear King and Bobo Chico Stories for Kids podcast with my wife, Vicki, and our good friend, relative, cousin, Scott Whitney. So we've just launched our second season, another 13 stories for kids.
That is absolutely lovely. We love kid podcasts at our house. We use them all the time, especially in the summer, which is where we are right in the middle of when the kids are home all day and I am sick of being the entertainer. So thank you for entertaining my kids when I am done.
Great.
So why did you all start Bear King and Bobo Chico?
Long story short, when my two children, who are now adults, were kids, I would make up bedtime stories using their middle names and abbreviating them. So Woody and Katie. And these are just stories made off the top of my head.
Sure.
My son, several years ago, said, "Hey, Dad," and this is early in the pandemic, and we were socially distanced in their backyard. Probably in February, so it was kind of chilly, but we're sitting outside, and he goes, "Hey, Dad, why don't you make up a story for my son Arlo?" I go, "Sure, okay." What about? He goes, "Well, he's really into pirates, and he likes looking at the crows that fly up in the trees around our house, and he's also really into wind." Okay. So off the top of my head, I just did a story, and Vicky snapped a picture of then 3-year-old Arlo, and he had this sort of faraway look as he was listening to the story. And afterwards, my son said, "That was great. Can you make more?" I'm going, well, Drew, I just made this up off the top of my head. But that was the inspiration for starting to actually craft some stories with the thought that maybe they would become a book or something like that. But then my daughter, Erin, who heard me telling the story, she said, Dad, your voices are really what makes it.
Mm.
Oh, she goes, you should do a podcast. So we pivoted from going into bookmaking into making the podcast, and with Scott Whitney and his business, all about that line of work. We immediately had a very experienced producer and sound technician and musician and all kinds of stuff to add to the story. So it just all came together.
That's awesome. And isn't it so nice to have people on your team that are really good at things that like you aren't as good at? It just makes everything so much better.
Absolutely. I just focus on creative content, and then Vicky's background in public relations and marketing, she really brings the whole, how to put everything together and how to find a graphic artist to help us, with visualizing some of the characters and the stories. So it's been a lot of fun.
Definitely. What do you want kids and their parents to get out of your podcast?
You just mentioned one thing about listening, and I remember how my imagination would really be sparked in listening to the story and having to fill in with my own imagination what was happening. So, what I want to do is help take the kids on just a little bit of a fanciful trip. Each episode over the now 26 that we've created. But I'm also a grandparent and also a dad. So I know that storytelling can also be a gentle way to both impart something that is important to say, but in a gentle way. But the second thing that I find has been very helpful is recognizing that children are growing and they're going
Mm.
through their own situations. And many of the stories that I've written and told have come from just interactions that my grandsons have had and things that they're facing. And I go, that's really important that a kid gets validated that they're either their fears or their joys or their frustrations or their questions are taken seriously, but hopefully done in a fun, gentle way. So hopefully all the stories have both an element of a challenge in them, and a lot of it is where do you find the courage to face that challenge?
Mm.
And letting kids know it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be kind. It's okay to show both frustrations and emotions, but also forgiveness and appreciation. Those. So I'm not a psychologist, but I just know as a parent, these are little life lessons. And
Yeah, I'm grateful because I feel like sometimes our kids don't listen to us, right? But they'll listen to a podcast, they'll listen to, Bear King and Bobo Chico as they go through something and they're like, oh, it almost like clicks when it's not their parent using those words. So thank you. Thank you for being that like outside force that's saying the exact same thing I am, but in a way more fun way. So you used words like gentle and like storytelling, but let's dive a little deeper into like the vibe, like what the show feels like.
So in the stories, it's a very simple formula. There's sort of peace and harmony, and then something happens.
Sure.
And what are we going to do about that? And sometimes Bobo Chico and Bear King are the ones that are, coming up with a solution. Many times, though, it's the other characters. And I've also blended into every story somebody in my family or somebody who's an acquaintance to us mix up the letters so we get up these weird names, which also makes it a bit kind of fanciful. Um, and I think it is people, the listeners, hopefully my grandsons, but also my nieces and other people, seeing themselves in the story, imagining that
Mm.
they're there in that situation, that they recognize, oh yeah, I have that question or that maybe that fear, how did I face that, or how should I face that, or how could I come to some sense that I'm growing in doing these things? Um, so I really enjoy putting young kids not in a secondary role, but actually sometimes bringing them into the forefront and having them be, really the ones who are the key characters, dealing with the issues of the story, um, and feeling at the end that, kind of empowered, like, Lore, which is my grandson's name rearranged, and Rowan, my other grandson's name rearranged. They also have interactions with as
Mm.
brothers, younger
Hmm.
and older brothers. Boy, that's I think one of the most powerful dynamics for small kids when they have young friends their age or near their age, or the dynamic of siblings. How do you navigate, those challenges? How do you both be frustrated and yet know that you love them, but sometimes feel that they may not love you? Um, so hopefully those are things that folks will recognize both as parents,
Hmm.
or grandparents or other, friends, but certainly the kids, feeling that, golly, I can face that issue, or I can have that adventure. I can step outside the everyday and do some fun things.
I love a podcast that will help my kids feel empowered and just explore, like you were saying, like just use their imagination in a way that sometimes they don't get to as often when they're at school or when they're watching a show. So thank you. And I'm sure all of my listeners are grateful too. So I'm going to ask you what your favorite episode is, but first, to give you a second to think, where can people find you?
Our podcast is Bear King Bobo Chico dot buzzsprout.com, all lowercase, Bear King Bobo Chico, all run together, at buzzsprout.com. We also are on Instagram, and our handle is Bear King and Bobo Chico, all spelled out. And then if people want to reach out to me directly, I'm available at Bear King at Podworks, PODWORX.com.
Okay, fabulous. I will make sure to link all of that in the show notes so that people can go exactly where they want to go. And now you're kind of in the hot seat. Do you have a favorite episode or couple of episodes? Because I know it's hard to choose just one.
Yes. So one of the blessings of being the writer is that I also get to impart some of the things that I remember as a kid,
Mm,
both, you know, at times the struggle, but also times the fantasy and the fun. It's good to have those ideas. It's good to dream. It's good to think that your fantasy world is maybe closer to the real world. Lord
definitely.
knows as they get older, that'll get challenged, and they'll lose that innocence of childhood.
Definitely. We have to encourage it while it's there, right?
Yes.
So I like to ask kid podcasters, what age range do you like specifically target? We know that obviously like a wider range of kids listen and love it, but like what's kind of your target age range?
Well, as I found out, at age 2.5, 3, that's where my grandson could begin to understand, these small stories, and all the way up to whatever. But elementary school probably, if
Okay.
they
Hmm.
find pleasure in it when they're in middle school. One of my inspirations in storytelling was how much Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and these characters in the 10 Acre Wood, um, uh, I carried those stories all the way through my life, and
Hmm.
I can still read them and see both the fun and the fantasy and the wisdom of those things. So I'm bragging a little bit, or maybe being, a little over the top, but I sure hope that the stories resonate, maybe even with parents too, where they enjoy listening, going, let's listen to another one.
Yes. Like there are certain like songs where I'm like, we don't need to listen to that song again. But most kid podcasts, I'm like, oh yeah, we can definitely listen to another kid podcast. I'm just sick of listening to Baby Shark. So there we go. Um, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, one difference with the second season of stories was I wanted to link them all together so they would sort of build through, like a good epic. You could
Mm-hmm.
listen to individual ones, but when you listen to the series, they build and build and build. I thought that'd be an interesting device. I also thought it would be um, more fun for Lore and Rowan to experience some really different landscapes, some different worlds, different places, different people as part of the arc of the storytelling.
Oh, cool.
Um, and then coming back when they finally come home, so it's that epic leaving home, being on your own, being with friends, but always wanting to come home and yet recognizing, boy, this is a fun adventure, but I miss home. Boy, these are
Mm-hmm.
cool people, but I really miss my parents or I miss my family or my dog or whatever. So the second season, hopefully, folks will continue to listen to that, and we'll see if maybe there's a third one.
Oh, well, I hope so. We love a good epic, and especially I like to listen to those like on a road trip or something like that, so they build on each other and it's fun to like get ready for the next one and be actually excited to get back in the car whenever we're going wherever we're going. So that's really fun. That's a fun like added element. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I cannot wait to introduce my listeners and their kids to Bear King and Bobo Chico. They are definitely beloved characters at our house, and I'm sure they will be for my listeners too.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you know someone or a family who could use Bear King and Bobo Chico in their life, will you share this episode with them? Also, if you have the itch to start a podcast but need some help that's tailored to you and your show, fill out the form in the show notes so I can help you make your podcast the best it can be. Talk to you soon.